Papa-lucha-pop. Your mind say, woo, Papa-lucha-pop. She said, hey, baby.
Parsons Junior High School. This is where I started to sing with Art Garfunkel. Girl for Me, that we wrote that in his house, and we sang it here in the assembly. It was a big hit. Other people used to sing the song. Groups used to sing the song on street corners, like around here. In fact, at one point, somebody offered to buy the song from me for $25. And I said, of course. And Artie's father said, don't sell that song. Don't do that. I'll buy it. Which, of course, wouldn't have been fun at all. So he wouldn't let me sell it. But I really wanted to sell it. I said, I can write, I can write another one. This is easy. From what I understand, they were fairly upset at me at my old high school. Actually, in terms of teachers that inspired me, I really didn't have great teachers until college. There I had a few. For me, high school was mostly about recording with Artie, making our first record, and playing baseball on the high school baseball team. That was, what I remember most fondly about high school. My marks were okay. I guess it wasn't all. It probably was crap. I mean, if you look back at the curriculum and saw what it was, I'll bet there isn't a whole lot that you can, take from it.
When I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, I don't take my gold chrome away.
Did you have faith in your voice from an early age?
Oh, mixed. Well, I mean, one thing that had a big influence on me was I was sitting in my room and I was singing a song that I liked. It was called Anywhere I Wander.
But anywhere I wander, anywhere I roam.
And I was singing this song, and my father, who, as I said, was a musician, he had on like a tuxedo, and he was, he was like maybe 6 o'clock at night. He was getting ready to put the bass in the car and go drive off and, play his gig. And as he passed by my room, he stuck his head in and he said, "You have a nice voice, Paul." That had a big effect on me. So I felt good about that. But then when I started to sing with Artie, it was just when my voice was changing. So I never knew whether my voice was going to crack or not. So I had less confidence. Also, Artie, who was the only other kid in the neighborhood who was interested in singing, was also famous for having this great voice, famous in the neighborhood.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
We auditioned for Columbia Records in 1964, and we were signed in February. And I think we made the album in March or April. But all I can know is that they put it out, and the album was not a hit. And it wasn't until somewhere in the next year that they overdubbed The Sound of Silence, and it became a hit. But by then, I was living in England and working in England.
Let us be lovers when I read our fortunes together.
Can you remember your first trip to London? Because the kind of legend around the kind of music scene in London the time you first came here was like, there was incredible people playing incredible clubs. Was it really like that? Was it really like a kind of a hotbed of all these astonishing performers?
Well, when I came to live here, my first trip to London was my first trip to Europe, and I just stayed for a few days, and then I wanted to go to Paris. So I went to Paris, and I was singing in the streets, and I met a bunch of English kids, and they said, "Oh, well, when you have to come back to England, and then you can stay with us." And so when I came back, I went to stay with this family out in Essex, in Brentwood. And that's when I began to sing in the clubs, the folk clubs out in Essex. And eventually I found my way into, getting booked at clubs in London. And that's when I got, really into the folk scene in London. And it was a really vibrant folk scene. I mean, it was a scene that was really worth a movie. Like the way the Sex Pistols movie captured, that moment in time of punk, you know.
Yeah.
Well, that folk scene in London with Bert Jantz and Martin Carthy and John Renbourn, and there was a woman singer named Annie Briggs who was beautiful, you know, I mean, kind of Joan Baez beautiful. I learned a lot from England. I learned how to perform in England by doing all those clubs night after night. I really got to the point where I knew how to work with an audience. And when Simon and Garfunkel hit so quickly, and then we had to go on stage, really, we did my show. So I was lucky that I had been working all that time, and that's how I knew all of it. I knew which songs of mine were apt to have the biggest reaction, because they really weren't known. I mean, most of the songs weren't that well known. And also, I tried to learn a lot from the English guitarists. I tried to cop as much as I could from them.
Did you pick anything up from English traditional music at all?
Well, I picked up Scarborough Fair. I mean, had I not worked in English folk clubs, I never would have heard Scarborough Fair. So there was a tremendous benefit to me.
Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Was a true love of mine.
What about the period that you were in England? You must have been travelling about a lot. I mean, to some, I remember reading once in a folk magazine, I can't remember which one it was now, about some club in Grimsby in Lincolnshire writing to say that you were...
Cleethorpes, I played Cleethorpes, I played Grimsby. Well, mostly I worked around London. I came into London and I think I moved to Belsize Park. It's up near Chalk Farm.
Yes.
Near Hampstead. There were a lot of clubs around there, and I used to play there a little bit. Then I came back to the United States for a while, and when I moved back to England, I think I moved in with Judith Piepi, and she lives down near Cable Street by the docks. But I would sometimes get booked into these tours that would go out into the West or up north.
There was a woman there, Judith Piepi, who really campaigned.
Yes, she did.
And got you on the BBC on the religious slot there.
Yes. Judith was a very interesting person. She's passed away now quite a while. She was a Jew who fled Nazi Germany, and she converted to Church of England. She would pick up strays who were kids, you know, runaway kids who were sleeping in Soho or something, and she'd let them come and stay in her place. And she heard me singing somewhere, and she became a real advocate for me. And she went to whoever it is that she knew at the BBC who produced the show 5 to 10, I think it was called. It was a 5-minute little sermon, a little religious sermon, and then occasionally there'd be a song. And she invited me to come and sing, you know, some of my songs if they seemed to have some kind of connection to something in a sermon. I did a show a year or so ago, and Paul McCartney was there, and he came back after the show. We had sung some songs from this show that I wrote for Broadway called The Cape Man. It had just had a little revival, so I brought some of the singers in and sang, you know, some of the songs. And there was quite a bit of religious imagery in The Cape Man. Well, I mean, that was about a character who was, you know, Puerto Rican and Catholic. Anyway, Paul said, "Hey, aren't you Jewish?" And I said, "Well, you know, and probably in the sense that you mean it. My parents are Jewish. I'm not religious. I don't really have a religion." He said, "Because there's so much God and Christian imagery in your songs." You know, he said, I was like wondering. I wish I could give you a really clear answer about why that is, but I don't have one. It just seems to arrive. It doesn't always arrive with a religious context. Like the first time really was Mrs. Robinson. I believe that was the first time that Jesus was used in a pop song that they played on the radio.
And here's to you, Mrs. Robinson. Jesus loves you more.
But Mrs. Robinson is not a religious song, or, a lot of the references that I make that have God or religious imagery, they're not always in a religious context. Although I must say, I was surprised myself that if, like, the first 6 songs that I wrote, 5 of them had either God or some implication about it. And I stopped myself and said, hey, what's going on here? I said, I don't really, I'll see. I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe something's on my mind and it'll come out. No, we didn't want the soundtrack album to come out. We felt it was basically a repackage of old material. And we were opposed to it. They put it out anyway.
Paul Simon at the BBC.
The Swan Silvertones were my favorite gospel quartet. But the Swan Silvertones had a singer. Their lead singer was named Claude Jeter, Reverend Claude Jeter. And he had this ethereal falsetto. It was a beautiful falsetto. And this one particular song, which was one of their famous songs, "Oh Mary, Don't You Weep," he's singing, and at a certain point he scats a line, and he says, "I'll be your bridge over deep water if you trust in my name." So that was in there at the same time that I was writing this melody, which was also influenced by, in a tiny bit, by a song on Everly Brothers' album. The album was called "Songs Our Daddy Taught Us," and the particular song was called "Long Time Gone," and it had this jump of an octave, and that's in "Bridge Over Troubled Water" too. This octave jump.
Maybe there'll be no long time gone. Be a long time gone.
But anyway, those 2 elements, it's not like if I said, here, take this element and take this and see if you can write "Bridge Over Troubled Water." You won't, But that got tied into whatever strange force that I experienced that made me write this song in a relatively short time, like a night or 2. And when I wrote it, I said, "Wow, that's better. That's better than I usually write." And I never used those chords before, and that's good. I'm going to give it to Artie to sing, which was probably one of the bigger mistakes I made.
When you're weary.
I kind of find it amazing that you documented your split with Art Garfunkel in song. You wrote about it. You wrote in "The Only Living Boy in New York" and "So Long, Frank Lloyd Wright" about the split as it was happening. That's tremendously...
Well, "The Only Living
brave thing
Boy"
to
is
do.
not really about our split. "The Only Living Boy" is about Artie going off to make the movie Catch-22. We weren't splitting at that point. He was just leaving for an extended period of time. And I was sort of writing a song that said, good luck, do your best, have a great time. "So Long, Frank Lloyd Wright" is kind of kidding around and saying we're splitting because, he already studied architecture at school. But no, we didn't split until after Catch-22.
Tom, get your plane right on time. We don't know where, we don't know where.
So talk a lot about finding a groove on a song musically, and kind of that being, that's sometimes the jumping off point for the lyrics, whereas I kind of assume that maybe always lyrics came first, but the groove, the rhythm of things is kind of a starting point.
The lyrics always come last with me, whether they come from the groove or whether they come from the chord changes if I write it as a guitar piece. What happened was when I first started to write, when I was living here, and all the early Simon and Garfunkel songs, my process was I would sit with my guitar and I'd play and I'd sing whatever came into my mind. And that's how I wrote. And a lot of those songs, including "The Sound of Silence," "Homeward Bound," and "The Boxer," and a lot of those became very popular songs. But as my playing got more complex, I wasn't really able to play the guitar and sing at the same time because I was concentrating on, some guitar move that...
Some strange inversion
that's
up
right.
the neck.
So then I would put the guitar down, record it, and then I'd approach it, and then start to, write the lyrics. And then after a few years of that, and then I thought, it really doesn't matter where or who plays what I'm going to sing over. It doesn't have to be limited to what I play on guitar.
The source can be different.
Yeah, that's exactly. The sound can be different, and the source can be different. And all I have to do is give a sketch, and then if I find the right player, I'd say I want to do something that sounds a little bit like this. What do you play? And they play something, and I'd say, that's good. Can you now change the key and play this over here? And so I was more in editing mode. And from there, I said, I don't really even need any instruments. I can just have a groove and sing over it. And in fact, if I go back to Cecilia, that's all Cecilia was. Us pounding on drums and piano benches and stuff. And somewhere in there I heard 1 minute and 15 seconds of a really good groove, and I said, just make a loop of that, and I'll write a song over it.
Or like 50 Ways, when you've got Steve Gadd's...
Well, 50 Ways,
piece.
I had written the whole song.
Oh, okay. That's contradicting my theory.
I came in that particular case, but what did happen was I came in, I had this little old drum machine from the 70s, where I was playing it, and I said, well, here's the song. And Steve said, I've been practicing this kind of riff. See if you like it, And he just just sat down and played that. And where it comes from was when he was in the Army, he was in the drum corps. So he had to learn all of these, parade drum things, where you have all those trills and...
Kind of rudiment bits, yeah.
Right. So he used to just practice that on his pad, different things. So that's where 50 Ways, comes from.
And get yourself free.
When I began my solo albums, I went to the rhythms that I was interested in. With Simon and Garfunkel, the tendency was to go to ballads because he was a great ballad singer, and he didn't like to sing rhythm. But I was neither a great ballad singer nor a great rhythm singer, and I liked rhythm, so that's where I went. Mother and Child Reunion, when I went to Kingston, I went down to cut that as a ska record. And the musicians there said, no, ska is out. It's reggae. That's the first time I heard the term reggae.
No, I would not give you false hope.
Hearts and Bones was not a hit, so then I had 2 commercial flops in a row. And those were the only 2 big pieces of work that I had done in 8 years. And now I was in trouble, from an industry point of view. But I said to myself, if you want to have a hit, and you don't want to compromise your writing, well, then that's the definition of the problem that you have to solve now. Don't make an esoteric song in 6/8 time that's a ballad and expect to have a hit. You won't. It's got to be a rhythm song, and the tracks have to be great rhythm tracks. And if you want to write as good a lyric as you've done, okay, but make sure that more people can understand it. Otherwise, you won't have a hit. And that's the problem. So, now what? And Graceland was the now what.
Boy in the bubble and the baby with the babbling heart, and I believe.
That was one of the few lyrics that came to me while I was in South Africa. It came to me either just as I was about to fall asleep or in a dream. The words, the way the camera followed him in slow-mo, the way he smiled to us all was the original words that came to me. I changed them slightly to the way the camera follows us in slow-mo, the way we look to us all. But I had this image, those Zapruder films of Kennedy? You know, that strange slow motion image where you see somebody like they're waving and they're smiling, and then some violent thing happens and it's still all in slow motion and the smile still hangs over, and then they play it again and again on television. There was something about that stayed in my mind. Plus, the fact that I had been thinking for some time that the most poetic language that I was seeing was coming from the field of science. This metaphor of the boy in the bubble, of somebody who had such a desire to live, but couldn't live in the world without the protection of being in the bubble, because their life would be in jeopardy just by breathing the air. That desire to live and the fact that the bubble made them isolated seemed like an apt 20th, 21st century metaphor.
It's a bit unfair, was it not, that you were supported by Hugh Masekela and Miriam Makeba, and you took South African music to the world, and it's been very good for the South African music scene, and yet you were criticized. It provoked a fascinating debate about culture and politics, didn't it?
It was a very interesting debate. It was a debate that was settled, really, which is a side benefit of Graceland. The issue is settled, really. There's nothing to say about it. Musicians want to play with other musicians. World music exists as a form. The South African cultural boycott was not effective as it was applied to music and culture. The South African musicians didn't want to have their music boycotted. That wasn't the intention of the boycott. It wasn't intended to hurt those musicians. And all of that came out with the argument. And I was, at the center of it because I was a white guy from New York who went to South Africa and had a big hit. Because, had I not had a hit, there wouldn't have been that discussion at all. Of course, I did pay everybody, and I did credit everybody, and I did give everybody royalties who needed it, and I treated those musicians the same way I treated any other musicians that I worked with.
The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar.
The huge positive was that this music and this joy and these rhythms were taken to the world, and especially when you went to Zimbabwe, so people from South Africa could come and attend that concert.
Right.
So it must have been an incredible moment in your life to be on that stage and see these thousands of people in the audience dancing with joy and singing along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the highlights of my performing career. To be in a stadium in Africa and playing for a mixed audience, music that both whites and blacks embrace, that was an extraordinary thing. I'll never forget it.
Just to talk about one particular song, You Can Call Me Al, can we just talk a little bit about the beginnings of that?
I think that comes from a guitar riff that Ray Peary started to play. We started it in South Africa, but we didn't get it right. And when everyone was in New York for the television show, months later, we came back at it and did get it right. There were a bunch of recording techniques that added, to the record, the horns and the bass solo that, was half backwards, and the title and the lyrics and whatever. It's so infectious as a groove and as a record that it just makes people dance. I call it the national anthem. Every time we play it, everybody stands up. Just a very, very happy song that actually talks about a more serious issue than people, I think about. It's just, in a way, it's something of my story. A guy goes without knowing really what he's going to find into Africa and has an intense spiritual experience, and there's a transformation that occurs, and that's what that song is about.
And your father, I guess now, would be content that you didn't have to get a proper job after all.
He said to me once, I can't argue with the success. It's It's great, and I'm grateful, for everything that you did, for me and Mom, and is that really what you want to be? You want to be a rock star? And I said, yeah, I do. What do you think I should be? And he said, a teacher.
Because maybe you have been all the way along.
Maybe that's how I was meant to teach, with music. Everything's a mystery, isn't it? You know it?
Sure is.
You once said when you were a kid in Queens that all you were interested in was girls, rock and roll, and baseball. Has anything changed?
First statement is basically true. That's true. Of course, I have to leave the girls part out because now I'm interested in one girl, my wife, but yeah, that's it. I still love baseball. I love to watch it. I'm a fan. I played it when I was a kid, so I understand the game. I understand strategy, and it's a very relaxing thing to watch. Otherwise, I pretty much don't watch television.
Girls, rock and roll, and baseball. It's a pretty fine maxim to live by.
Right. Drugs is left out of that. Otherwise, it was the same. Drugs, sex, and rock and roll. But in my case, you have baseball in there.